All right, buckle up, everybody, because today we are diving deep into the Battle of Plassey, 1757.
Oh, yeah.
You know, you hear another battle and you think, oh boy, here we go.
Right.
But this one's different. This one's a game changer. And we're going all in. History books, architectural studies, even some linguistics.
Wow.
All to understand how this single event, Plassey, set the stage for, well, British control over India for like centuries.
It really is fascinating how Plassey goes way beyond just military strength.
Yeah.
You know, it's a story of ambition, betrayal, and two completely different worlds colliding.
Totally. We're talking about Siraj Ud-Daulah, the Nawab of Bengal, ruling a region overflowing with riches, textiles, agriculture, you name it.
Right.
And on the other side, you've got the British East India Company starting as these like unassuming traders. And then suddenly it's like, wait a minute, we could rule this whole place.
It's like they had this realization. Exactly. At that time, the Mughal Empire, which had held power for centuries, by the way, was really starting to weaken. And that created a power vacuum where regional powers like Bengal became prime targets for control.
Prime real estate.
Right. And the East India Company, even though they started out just focused on trade, they saw a golden opportunity. And they were quick to adapt, learning the intricacies of governance, military strategy, the whole 9 yards.
Like a crash course in empire building?
Pretty much. And what's even crazier, they didn't even have that deep of an understanding of India beyond trade routes and profits.
Wow.
But man, were they fast learners. That ambition mixed with, well, a healthy dose of ruthlessness helped them gain a foothold in Bengal.
Ruthless ambition, always a winning combo. So let's talk about the battle itself.
Yeah.
Siraj Ud-Daulah's army, I mean, from what I read, they completely outnumbered the British forces like Robert Clive's forces.
Yeah, they did.
How on earth did he pull off a victory against such odds?
Well, that's where the betrayal comes in. One of the Nawab's top generals, Mir Jafar, he saw a chance to gain power and probably a ton of wealth by siding with the British. A classic case of ambition and self-interest changing the course of history.
Talk about a power move. So this backstabbing basically handed the win to the British.
It definitely played a huge role. The battle itself was shockingly short and decisive. The British casualties, you wouldn't believe how low they were, especially considering the size of the army they were facing.
I mean, it makes you wonder how such a small force could achieve such a monumental victory.
Right.
Sounds like Plassey was a turning point, not just for Bengal, but for the entire subcontinent.
You got the Plassey is like this big bang moment that marks the beginning of the East India Company's shift from, merchants to rulers. That victory gave them Bengal, which was a massive prize, overflowing with resources, but it also sort of solidified their expansionist goals across India.
So this one battle basically lit the fuse for the British Raj.
Exactly. And the consequences, they were huge. We're talking economic exploitation on a grand scale, the imposition of British systems, even attempts to, fundamentally reshape Indian culture and society, all stemming from Plassey.
Wild how one event can ripple through history like that. But I'm curious, our sources mentioned architecture and linguistics. How do those tie into the whole Plassey story?
Okay, so before we get into that, think about it. India, before the British marched in with their architectural blueprints, already had this incredible, diverse architectural landscape.
Oh, absolutely. The Taj Mahal, for example.
Exactly. There's so much more, though. One source pointed out this fascinating parallel between the layout of Fatehpur Sikri, this Mughal capital built by Akbar the Great, and the structure of Mughal military camps.
Whoa, so their architecture mirrored their military strategy. That's amazing.
Right. It gives you a glimpse into their world, their sense of grandeur, their insane attention to detail. But what's interesting is that once the British took over, they started imposing their own architectural style all over India.
I guess they wanted to leave their mark, literally reshape the landscape to fit their vision.
Exactly. And this, clash of architectural styles, it kind of mirrors the broader clash of cultures that happened as a result of British rule.
It makes you think about what was lost. What cultural threads got disrupted during that time? Speaking of threads, didn't we have something about linguistics in our source pile?
Oh yeah, we did. It's easy to forget that India, even before the British influence, had this incredible tapestry of languages, each with its own rich history and literary traditions. One source specifically mentioned Tamil in its ancient literature. It's a good reminder that India's story is made up of many voices, many different perspectives.
So much to unpack here, even beyond the battlefield itself.
Absolutely. Plassey is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to understanding the complex history of India and the impact of British colonialism.
Yeah.
This story, it goes so much deeper than dates and battles.
So with Mir Jafar's betrayal playing such a big role, I mean, do you think the outcome of Plassey was kind of inevitable? Or could things have gone a different way?
That's the million-dollar question, right? And it's something I want you all to think about as we keep going with this deep dive. Could Siraj Ud-Daulah have held his ground without that betrayal? Or were the forces already in motion, the shifting power, the British ambition, too much to overcome?
It's fascinating to think about those what-ifs of history. But even if we can't change the past, understanding it can definitely help us navigate the present and the future.
Exactly. And that's what we're doing here, digging into the complexities of events like the Battle of Plassey and seeing how they still resonate in the world we live in today. It's crazy how these seemingly small, like isolated events can have these massive consequences.
Yeah, tell me about it.
Think about it. Plassey wasn't just this turning point for, like, India. It had this huge impact on, well, the entire world.
It's true. It's mind-blowing when you start to consider the ripple effects,
Yeah.
global economic systems, political landscapes, even like the exchange of cultures. It feels like they were all shaped in some way by the rise of British power in India after Plassey.
Right. And it brings us to this really important point, this interconnectedness of history. What happens on one side of the world can send shockwaves across the globe. The Battle of Plassey, perfect example of that.
So what do you think is like the main takeaway our listeners should get from this deep dive into Plassey? What's the big, like, overarching idea here?
I'd say it's understanding that interconnectedness. How events in one corner of the world, like this battle in Bengal, can have these profound and lasting consequences on a global scale.
It's like a reminder that history isn't just, like, gone.
Yeah.
It's still shaping our present and our future.
Absolutely. It's alive, it's dynamic, and it's constantly informing our understanding of the world around us. That's why it's so important to engage with it, to learn from it, and to, question it.
I love how history can make you question everything. Plus, let's be real, it's just fascinating.
Yeah.
The stories, the characters, the unexpected twists and turns.
Yeah.
It's like the best kind of drama, except it's real.
Totally agree. And the more we, delve into history, the more we realize how much we don't know. There are always new discoveries, new perspectives, just waiting to be uncovered.
Speaking of uncovering earlier, we talked about the cultural impact of British rule in India. We touched on architecture and linguistics. But how did daily life actually change for, like, the average person on the ground?
Yeah. Imagine a society where, centuries-old traditions and ways of life are suddenly disrupted.
Right.
The British came in and brought these new systems of, administration, law, education. All of this had a significant impact on Indian society.
So it went beyond, like, military conquest and economic exploitation.
Yeah.
There's a fundamental shift in how people live their lives.
Exactly. And the consequences of this cultural clash were complex and far-reaching. It wasn't a one-size-fits-all situation. The impact varied a lot, depending on social status, religion, region, and other factors.
So many layers.
Yeah.
What would you say are some key takeaways for our listeners about the broader societal transformations that happened under British rule in India?
First, it's really important to remember that British rule wasn't static. Policies and attitudes evolved over time, and even British officials, they held a range of viewpoints.
Okay.
Some were genuinely interested in improving the lives of Indians,
Right.
while others were more focused on, exploiting the country's resources. It wasn't this simple black and white picture.
It sounds like there were a lot of nuances and complexities involved.
Definitely. It's also crucial to acknowledge that many Indians resisted British rule right from the start.
Oh, I bet.
They fought back in various ways, from armed rebellions to nonviolent protests to intellectual movements that challenged British authority.
It's inspiring to think about how, despite that power imbalance, people still found ways to resist and fight for their rights.
Absolutely. And these acts of resistance, they're crucial to understanding India's journey towards independence. You could say that the seeds of the independence movement were sown, in part, by the events that unfolded at the Battle of Plassey.
It's hard to believe how something that happened so long ago, in a completely different part of the world, could have such a lasting impact.
It all goes back to that interconnectedness we were talking about, how seemingly unrelated events can be linked in the most unexpected ways. The Battle of Plassey is, this prime example of how actions have consequences that ripple through time and space.
Makes you think about how we're all part of this massive web of historical events.
We are, and it's a humbling realization.
Yeah.
But before we wrap up this part, I think it's really important to talk about the impact of British education on India.
Yes, let's get into that. The British established these English language schools and universities in India.
Right.
They introduced, like, European literature, philosophy, and science. Was that all just an attempt to, like, impose British culture?
There is definitely an element of that, this idea of trying to civilize India according to British standards. But, some British officials genuinely believed that they were sharing knowledge and helping India progress.
Yeah, but who gets to decide what progress even means for another culture, right?
Exactly. But here's where it gets interesting. This new education system, it unintentionally sparked this intellectual awakening in India. It exposed Indians to new ways of thinking, new ideas, and ultimately it helped fuel the independence movement.
It's like they gave them the tools they needed to overthrow them.
Well, it wasn't quite that straightforward, but access to Western education did help to create a generation of Indians who began to question British rule and imagine a different future for their country. Think of it like a fire that was unintentionally sparked and then it spread beyond control.
Wow, that's a really powerful analogy.
It's a reminder that even the best laid plans can have unintended consequences. This fire, fueled by both Western ideas and a deep yearning for self-determination, eventually led to India's independence.
Okay, so we've covered a lot in this part, from the ripple effects of Plassey to the complexities of British rule and the impact of education on Indian society. As we move into the final part of our deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with one final thought, something to ponder.
I'm all ears.
We talked about the British bringing their ideas to India.
Yeah.
But what about the flow in the other direction? How did Indian culture, art, music, philosophy, spirituality impact Britain?
Yeah.
And how did that cultural exchange shape both societies?
Now that's a question worthy of its own deep dive.
Right. It reminds us that history is a two-way street. There's always more to uncover, more to understand. It really is. And it kind of highlights how history is never really, finished. It's always evolving, always shaping the present, even if we aren't always aware of it.
Exactly. And on that note, maybe it's time to start wrapping up our deep dive into the Battle of Plassey and the rise of British power. What a journey, huh?
It really has been. We've uncovered so much: the military strategies, the political maneuvering, the cultural clashes, all these different threads coming together at this one pivotal moment in history.
We've seen how the impact of Plassey was huge, shaping not just India, but the entire world. It reminds us that history isn't just about dates and battles, but about real people and the legacies they leave behind.
And it's about understanding how connected everything is, how a battle fought in Bengal back in 1757 could still be shaping our world today.
For sure. So, before we sign off, what's the one thought, the one big takeaway you want to leave our listeners with today?
I think it's this. Never stop questioning. Never stop exploring. The story of India, of its people, its culture, its history, it's so rich and complex. There's always more to learn, more to discover.
Well said. And remember, the Battle of Plassey is just one piece of this massive, intricate puzzle. So keep diving deeper, keep asking those tough questions. You never know what you might find.
And on that note, we'll catch you on our next deep dive. Happy exploring.